Snow wasn't just falling that night over Evergreen Valley Hospital, it was attacking, driving sideways across the parking lot in white sheets that erased the forest and swallowed the access road. The little hospital sat at the edge of the Idaho National Forest like a stubborn lantern half buried in ice, its windows glowing pale yellow against the dark wall of trees. Inside, under humming fluorescent lights, Evelyn Carter was fighting sleep with a half-cold cup of coffee and a stack of charts that would not end. She rubbed the bridge of her nose with ink-stained fingers, eyes burning. 12 hours on the night shift hadn't quite burned her out, but it had come close. She could feel the familiar ache at the back of her neck, the tired stiffness in her shoulders, the quiet loneliness that settled into the building when visiting hours were long over and the only sounds were monitors and the heating system. 10 more minutes, she muttered to herself, signing her name on another discharge summary. 10 more minutes, and then I'm horizontal and unconscious. That's the dream. She thought vaguely about the bed in her tiny apartment, about the dent in the middle of the mattress and the way the radiator rattled. She thought about calling her sister tomorrow, about whether she should finally sign up for that hiking group somebody had told her about. She thought about anything except the storm outside, because if she looked at it too long, she always felt like the woods were staring back. The automatic doors at the entrance whooshed open. At first, that didn't register as strange. Sometimes the wind caught the sensor just right. Sometimes an ambulance dumped in a late surprise. Evelyn glanced up automatically, already forming the polite, exhausted smile she gave to people who walked in, bleeding 15 minutes before her shift ended. The smile never made it to her face. A wall of air as cold as a glacier crashed into the lobby, scattering the stack of magazines on the coffee table. Snowflakes rode the draft all the way to the reception desk. The wind smelled sharp and wild and wrong inside the hospital. Then something stepped through the open doors. For a second, Evelyn's brain flat out refused to process what her eyes were seeing. It tried to shape the huge white mass into familiar things. A snowdrift collapsing, a big man in a parka, a broken piece of equipment being wheeled in under a tarp. But the shape kept moving forward on 4 thick legs, claws scraping faintly against tile, shoulders rolling under a coat of shaggy, wet fur. A bear, a huge white bear. Not polar, her mind registered numbly. Too broad, too low to the ground, bigger through the chest. Wrong latitude anyway. But the fur was white, almost unnaturally so, and matted in places with dark, frozen clumps that took her brain an extra heartbeat to identify as dried blood. It limped. Its weight favored the right side, every step on the left front leg a dragged, reluctant thing that left a smear of red on the polished floor. The bear's head hung low, steam rising from its muzzle in ragged bursts. Evelyn's whole body locked. Every primal alarm she possessed began screaming at once. This is impossible. This is dangerous. Move, run, hide. She could feel her heart pounding in her throat, in her ears, in the tips of her fingers. Time thinned out around her. Colors went sharp. The bear took another step into the lobby. The lights caught its eyes, amber, ringed with scarlet from burst veins. They glowed weirdly in the artificial brightness. It looked straight at her, not around her, not past her. At her. Evelyn couldn't move. She had seen fear in human eyes 1,000 times, but this was different, older, raw, and yet horribly familiar. There was agony there, and exhaustion, and under both of those, something that should not have existed in the gaze of a wild animal. A plea. The bear's front paw slipped slightly in its own blood. Its shoulder buckled. With a shuddering exhale, the massive body folded until it was half sitting, half kneeling on the tile. The sound that came from its throat wasn't a roar. It was a low, broken moan. Metal clanged dully against the floor. Evelyn's eyes dropped, following the line of blood. Her stomach lurched. A steel leg trap clung to the bear's left paw like a cruel bracelet, its serrated jaws buried so deep in flesh that swollen tissue bulged over the edges. The metal was old and dented, smeared with rust and dark crusts that could only be old blood. The fur around the wound was clotted and filthy. Even from where she stood, she could smell the sour stink of infection. Her training kicked in suddenly, slicing through the surreal haze. Severe crush injury, necrotic tissue, high risk of sepsis, blood loss, pain level beyond anything she'd ever seen in a human being still conscious. And then she noticed the belly. The thick white fur along the bear's abdomen swelled outward in a rounded, unmistakable curve. Pregnant. she whispered, before she could stop herself. The words seemed to ring in the empty lobby. This is insane, part of her mind insisted. You're standing in a hospital lobby in the middle of Idaho, looking at an albino Kodiak bear that is pregnant and bleeding on your floor. The other part of her, the one that remembered every time she'd grabbed a stranger's hand on an ER gurney, heard something else. 2 heartbeats tucked inside that pain. 2 lives that had been carried through the snow and darkness to land here, at her feet. The bear swayed. Evelyn's legs wanted to run. Instead, one foot slid forward, then the other. Her throat was so tight she could barely breathe. "Hey," she heard herself say, voice trembling. "Hey, easy now." It was a ridiculous thing to say to an animal that could end her life faster than most of the injuries she treated, but it was all she had. The bear looked at her for one long heartbeat, then, with an skull, effort that made every muscle in its massive shoulders tremble, it lifted its right front paw, the one that wasn't mangled in iron, and set it down, very carefully, on top of her shoe. The weight was real. The contact was deliberate. The message coursed through Evelyn with the force of a physical blow. "You. I'm asking you." Her vision blurred. "Okay," she thought wildly. "Either I'm losing my mind, or this bear just chose me." The alarm at the nurse's station finally made up its mind to shriek. The sudden wail shattered the fragile stillness. Footsteps thundered down the hall. Voices collided in a rising wave. "What's happening out there? Is that... Jesus Christ! Get back! Get back!" A security guard skidded to a halt beside her, hand already reaching for the radio at his shoulder. "Dispatch, this is Evergreen Valley. We've gotta..." "Stop," Evelyn snapped. It was barely more than a choked cough, but something in her tone cut through the panic. For a moment, everyone fell silent. She felt dozens of eyes on her back, felt the heat of the bear's breath against her thigh. Dr. Monroe, the attending physician on call, pushed to the front of the knot of staff. His usually composed face was drained of color. "Carter," he said, voice low and taut. "Step away. Now. Animal control is 5 minutes down the road. We hold the line until..." "They'll bring dart rifles," another nurse blurted. "Standard for large predators, heavy anesthetic, maybe the live rounds as backup." Words Evelyn had read in textbooks unfurled in her mind. Sedation protocols, dosage charts, risk factors. She pictured the steel trap again, the infected flesh, the strain on the bear's heart and lungs from blood loss and pain. She pictured those tiny curled forms that had to be there inside that distended belly, bodies no bigger than her hand. "A big enough dose to drop her," she said hoarsely, "could stop their hearts entirely. And if the infection's systemic..." She didn't finish. She didn't need to. The grim line that settled around Monroe's mouth said he'd done the math with her. "We don't have the facilities for this," he said, almost pleading. "We aren't a zoo. We aren't a wildlife clinic. If that thing panics, we'll be scraping interns off the walls." The bear made a low, rumbling sound deep in her chest. Not a threat, just pain. The paw on Evelyn's shoe pressed down a fraction harder, as if to remind her it was still there. "You." An image flashed through Evelyn's mind. Herself, walking away. Letting someone else handle it. Walking out into the storm in an hour, going home, sleeping, and pretending she hadn't looked into those eyes and seen herself reflected there. The same desperate helplessness she'd felt the night her mother had died in a hospital 3 states away because nobody could get there in time to hold her hand. She swallowed a metallic taste in her mouth. "I can't let them put her down," she said quietly. Monroe stared at her. "What are you going to do then? Sign her in? Start her on a payment plan?" The edge of hysteria in his joke almost made her laugh. Almost. "I'm going to take the trap off," she said. The words hung in the air like smoke. "With what?" Monroe demanded. "A sternly worded letter." "With what we have," she shot back. "Tools, anesthesia, sutures, the same things we use on humans. The anatomy's not that different. Bones are bones. Blood is blood. You've lost your mind." "Probably," she said. "But she walked in here instead of dying in the woods. She picked me. I can't ignore that." Behind them, someone whispered, "She picked her?" in a tone that suggested that, yes, Evelyn really had gone round the bend. The bear lifted her head again, as if on cue. Those amber eyes swept past the group of humans and settled back on Evelyn. She could have imagined the softening in them, but she didn't think she did. Evelyn's fear didn't vanish. It stayed, a cold, steady pressure in her chest, but something else unfolded around it. Something fierce and stubborn and oddly calm. "All right," she murmured, looking up into the massive face inches from hers. "If we're doing this, we do it together." She took a breath that felt like stepping off a cliff. "Clear a path to Trauma 3, she said, louder. "Get me a portable X-ray, bolt cutters, a jack or a spreader, as many hands as are brave enough to help, and the lightest dose of local anesthetic that will touch something that size without knocking her out completely. We're operating here, not hunting." The staff stared. Then, slowly, like a tide turning, people began to move. Not because they thought it was safe, but because, somewhere in the middle of their terror, they had all seen what she had when the bear put her paw on the nurse's shoe. It wasn't logical, but it was enough. Evelyn turned back to the bear and lifted her hand, palm out, like she might to a frightened dog. "Come on, sweetheart," she said softly. "Let's go fix that foot." The bear's ears flicked, her great shoulders bunched. Then she tried to stand. Watching 400 kilos of exhausted muscle and bone struggle upright that close made Evelyn's stomach twist. Every line of Snowbell's body, Evelyn found herself thinking of her by that name already, though she hadn't spoken it aloud yet, screamed of pain and depletion. Her good paw scrabbled for purchase. The ruined one dragged with a horrible scraping sound, metal grinding against tile. Without thinking, Evelyn stepped closer and slid her hand to the bear's shoulder. The fur under her fingers was wet and cold, clumped with snow and blood. Beneath that, she could feel the shuddering power of the animal trying so hard not to fall apart. "It's okay," she whispered. "Lean on me. I'm small, but I'm stubborn." Ridiculous. Words. But the bear didn't shake her off. Together, inch by inch, they crossed the lobby. Staff pressed themselves flat against the walls as the huge animal passed. Some stared in awe, some in horror. Someone made the sign of the cross. Someone else muttered, "If I die tonight, tell my wife I did something cool." Evelyn almost smiled at that. Humor, even nervous, was a tiny buoy in the middle of a very deep ocean. At the door of the trauma suite, the bear hesitated. It smelled wrong in there. Sharp antiseptic, cold metal, stale fear. The wild doesn't belong in tiled rooms. Evelyn could feel the tension coil back into Snowbell's muscles, feel the urge to bolt. Her own body wanted to bolt too. She laid her palm flat against the bear's chest. The heartbeat under her hand was fast and strong and scared. "I know," she said, and heard her own voice shake. "I know it smells like bad news. Believe me, people come in here smelling like panic, not victory. But you walked in our front door. You asked. The only way out is through." The bear's eyes held hers for a long, suspended moment. Then she moved forward, with the slow grace of something choosing courage over instinct. The operating table groaned under the weight, but held. Snowbell hauled herself up with an awkward, painful scramble, then rolled onto her side, presenting the mangled paw as if she'd done this 100 times. Evelyn swallowed, pulled on gloves, and stepped into the kind of fear that doesn't leave room for anything else. Up close, the trap was worse. The steel teeth had sunk so deep they'd nearly met bone. The flesh around them was a mess of shredded tissue, clotted blood, and angry, swollen infection. Evelyn's stomach roiled, but her hands moved with clinical precision, cleaning, injecting anesthetic into whatever spaces she could find, positioning the spreader bar. Monroe stood opposite her, jaw tight but hands steady. "If she decides she's had enough of this," he muttered, "I hope you know I'm blaming you from beyond the grave." "If she decides she's had enough of this," Evelyn said, not looking up, "I'm going to be too dead to care." The first attempt to open the trap sent a vibration up her arms that made her teeth ache. The metal resisted, creaking like something alive and angry. The bear tensed, muscles rippling, a low growl building in her chest. Evelyn felt it through the bar, through the floor, through her bones. Terror spiked, hot and white. "Look at me," she said suddenly. She didn't know if the bear would understand the words, but the tone, firm, focused, the one she used on panicking patients, came out clear. Amber eyes snapped to her face. "Good girl," she breathing, locking gaze with gaze. "Stay with me. Bite the bed if you have to, not the nurse, okay?" The growl hitched. As Monroe and the others leaned on the bar again, the trap began to yield. Rust flakes dropped, dark against white fur. With each millimeter it opened, the torn flesh shifted. Pain hit like lightning. Snowbell's head shot forward. Everyone in the room flinched. Evelyn didn't have time to move. Her hands were full, muscles screaming from the effort of keeping pressure on the bar. For one frozen heartbeat, she saw her own terror reflected in the curve of those enormous jaws. Then Snowbell dropped her muzzle, not toward Evelyn's face, but toward her arm. She pressed her forehead and closed mouth against the nurse's forearm, teeth clenched against themselves, not flesh. The vibration of the bear's pain rolled through Evelyn's bones. She realized she was talking. She didn't know when she'd started. I know, she murmured, a hoarse mantra. It's hell. It's awful. You're allowed to hate me for this. Just don't kill me for it, okay? Think of your kids. Think of the snow. Think of anything but my arteries. Ridiculous words again, but the rhythm of them steadied her hands, and something about the cadence seemed to settle the animal. Snowbell's grip on her arm never tightened beyond bruising. She held on like a climber to a rope. Piece by piece, the trap gave way. When it finally yawned fully open with a metallic shriek, blood gushed fresh and hot. The smell was overpowering. Evelyn forced herself not to flinch. They packed gauze, suctioned, irrigated. She cut away dead flesh, watching for signs of viable tissue. Stitched in layers, her world narrowing to needle, thread, wound, breathe. Don't pass out. Don't mess this up. Don't waste her trust. Outside, the storm battered at the hospital, but inside, time became nothing but a series of small, precise movements. At some point, the trembling in Snowbell's body began to ease. The growls dropped to low hums. By the time Evelyn tied the last suture and wrapped the paw thickly in bandages, the bear's eyes were half-lidded with exhausted relief. Evelyn peeled off her gloves with fingers that barely obeyed. Her arms ached, her back ached, her fear ached. The bear blinked at her. Then, slowly, she lifted her head and nudged Evelyn's chest with a weight that was surprisingly gentle. The contact broke something open in Evelyn. She laughed, shaky and half-sobbing. "We did it," she whispered, pressing her hand to the side of Snowbell's face. "You insane, brave creature. We actually did it." In the days that followed, the hospital became something it had never been before. A den. The old storage wing, once home to forgotten equipment and rusty shelves, transformed into a makeshift bear ward. They cleared the room, laid down thick mats, dragged in a space heater, and stacked boxes of supplies. A big tub sat in the corner, with meltwater and chunks of ice. Snowbell lay at the center of it all like some mythic guardian who had taken a wrong turn and ended up in a human fairy tale. Evelyn practically moved in with her. Officially, she still worked shifts. In reality, she stole, sleep where she could, curled on a narrow cot a few feet from the giant animal, waking at odd hours to check the wound, to adjust the IV, to stare at the ultrasound screen where two tiny silhouettes kicked and turned like pale fish. She started talking to Snowbell the way she'd once talked to her mother in the hospital room, quietly, like there was all the time in the world and none at all. She told her about ridiculous staff gossip, about the patient who insisted nurse call buttons were controlled by aliens, about her own fear of driving in the snow. She cursed the invisible poacher who had set the trap. She apologized out loud for every flash of pain she couldn't stop. Sometimes Snowbell just watched her, unblinking. Sometimes she let out a low, thrumming sound that pulsed through the floor and into the cot, like the heart of the mountain itself was purring. On the screen, the cubs grew. On Snowbell's bandaged paw, new tissue knit slowly, stubbornly over old damage. Outside, the winter deepened. The forest huddled under ice. Elk tracks appeared on the outskirts of the hospital grounds, disappearing again into the trees. Rumors spread in town about the white ghost being hidden at Evergreen, watched over by a nurse who'd lost her fear of death, or her mind. Evelyn didn't care what they thought. Standing in that room, watching a wild animal choose to sleep with her back turned to humans, feeling the warm gusts of breath on her cheek when Snowbell pushed her nose close for no apparent reason, it rewired something in Evelyn, reminded her that not all trust was human-sized. The night the cubs came, the storm returned with them. Snow slammed against the windows, turning the world beyond into a howling blur. The lights flickered once, twice, then steadied. Evelyn was just about to complain to Snowbell about the generator when she noticed the bear's breathing had changed. It was faster, rougher, not quite panting, but close. Snowbell stood, pacing a tight, restless circuit around the room, claws clicking against the mats. She paused, shifted her weight, groaned softly, and moved again. The fur along her flanks quivered. Evelyn's heart leapt into her throat. "Oh," she said softly. "Oh boy." All right, okay, here we go. The training her body held from human deliveries slid into place like muscle memory. It didn't matter that this mother had fur and 4 legs. The core of it was the same: create safety, make space, be present. She dragged blankets into the center of the room, layering them. She dimmed the lights. Her hands shook, but not from fear this time, from awe. Snowbell circled once, twice, then sank down heavily, her side pressing against Evelyn's knees as if she wanted a physical anchor. Right here, Evelyn murmured, resting a hand on the massive shoulder. I'm not going anywhere. Contractions came in waves. Snowbell's growls rose and fell with them. Not the sharp roar of anger, but the deep, guttural sound of effort. Her body gathered itself, pushed, rested, pushed again. And then, with a soft, wet sound and a tiny, muffled cry, a cub slid onto the blankets. It was small and impossibly fragile looking, all slick white fur and pink paws, eyes sealed shut. For a moment it lay still, as if stunned by existence. Then it moved. Evelyn choked on a laugh that was mostly a sob. "Hey there," she whispered. "Welcome to the strangest nursery on earth." Snowbell curved her enormous head around, licking the cub with slow, purposeful strokes, cleaning, warming, coaxing life into its tiny lungs. The cub squeaked, protesting everything. 20 minutes later, the second cub joined the first, equally outraged at being born. Evelyn's heart felt too big for her chest. She might have been content to stand there, witnessing, already more blessed than most people ever would be. Then Snowbell nudged both cubs, gently toward her. The meaning hit Evelyn harder than any roar. "You want me to?" she stammered. Snowbell's eyes met hers. There was exhaustion there, and pain, but also the same quiet certainty Evelyn had seen the night the bear laid her paw on her shoe. "I remember what you did. I trust you with what I love most." Very carefully, hands trembling, Evelyn scooped up the nearest cub. Warmth flooded her palms. The tiny, damp body wriggled weakly, nose bumping against her wrist, seeking. A squeak burst from it, outraged and alive. A laugh burst from Evelyn, too, cracking under the weight of her tears. "Hi," she said, voice shaking. "I'm Evelyn. I'm the one who ripped a metal nightmare off your mom. Please don't hold it against me when you're big enough to eat a car." Snowbell made a low, satisfied rumble that vibrated through the floor. In that moment, Evelyn thought, she would have fought the entire world, poachers, storms, bureaucracy, to protect this odd little half-wild family. But the world, for once, did not come to take. It came months later in the form of 2 wildlife officers with polite manners and reluctant eyes, carrying clipboards instead of guns. They were kind. They praised what the hospital had done. They called it miraculous. Then they said the words that had been waiting in the wings of Evelyn's mind ever since she'd watched cubs wobble across the mats on unsteady paws. They need to go home. She argued, of course. She argued until her throat hurt and her head ached. She pointed at the cubs, who were now big enough to clamber up onto the cot and collapse on top of her. She pointed at Snowbell's scarred paw, at the trust that let them take her temperature without a snarl. The officers listened, then they shook their heads. "If they stay," one said gently, "they stop being wild. They start becoming pets, exhibits. They deserve trees, not tiles." Evelyn knew that already. She had always known. Knowing hadn't made her ready. Release day dawned cold and painfully clear, the sky a pale washed-out blue over a world of white. The hospital staff piled into trucks, following the wildlife trailer into the forest. The snow here was deeper, undisturbed, the silence almost sacred. At a small clearing ringed with pines, they stopped. The back of the trailer opened with a bang. Snowbell emerged first. She was magnificent, larger than she had been under hospital lights, somehow, her coat clean and thick, muscles flowing easily under fur. Freedom seemed to fit her like a cloak she had only temporarily set aside. The cubs scrambled after her, bigger now, still smaller than their mother, but already powerful. They immediately stumbled into a snowdrift nose first, popped up, shook themselves, and did it again, as if the entire concept of cold was a new and marvelous joke. Evelyn stood a little back, hands jammed deep into her coat pockets to keep them from shaking. This is right, she told herself. This was the point. Not to keep them, but to give them back. Snowbell lifted her head, sniffing the air. The forest smelled like home, resin and cold water and the distant musk of other lives. The cubs nosed at her flanks, restless. She could have turned and left then. Instead, she turned toward Evelyn. The rangers tensed. Snowbell walked across the snow with an ease that made her previous limp seem like a bad dream. Each step brought her closer until she was standing directly in front of the nurse who had cut metal from her flesh and watched her children be born. Up close in the sharp winter light, her eyes seemed even more golden. The scar on her paw was a pale band under fur. Evelyn's breath came shorter. Her eyes burned. Snowbell leaned forward and pressed her forehead firmly into Evelyn's chest. The force of it rocked Evelyn back a half step, but there was no malice in it. It was as careful as something so big could be. Evelyn's hands found the sides of Snowbell's head almost on their own. Her fingers sank into the thick fur, clutching. "Go," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Go, be what you're meant to be. Raise them strong. Stay away from stupid human traps. And if you ever get caught in one again, I swear I'll come out here and yell at you for an hour before fixing you." A startled laugh bubbled from one of the officers, quickly smothered. Snowbell pulled back. They looked at each other one last, long time. Then the bear turned, chuffed softly to the cubs, and padded into the trees. Snow swallowed their tracks almost as quickly as their bodies. When the forest had closed behind them, all that remained was the memory of warmth on Evelyn's chest and the feeling that something vital had left, and yet somehow stayed. Life lurched back toward normal at Evergreen Valley. The storage wing was cleaned again. The space heater went back to maintenance. The only sign that anything unusual had ever happened there was a faint, lingering scent no one could quite erase, a ghost of fur and wild air. Sometimes, during quiet nights, Evelyn found herself staring out at the tree line beyond the parking lot lights, scanning for a flash of white among the black trunks. She told herself it was silly. Then, one night, months later, the silliness looked back. The storm that evening was gentler, more like falling ash than knives. The parking lot lay under a smooth blanket of snow, the lamps casting soft cones of light onto the drifts. Evelyn shrugged into her coat, her shift finally over, and pushed open the front doors. She froze halfway down the steps. At the edge of the light, where illumination faded into the dark wall of forest, a shape stood, large, white, still. Her heart stumbled, then sprinted. "Snowbell," she whispered, the word puffing into the cold. The bear stepped forward, into the glow. It was her, healed, strong. Her coat looked thicker than ever, tipped with frost. Snow dusted the fur along her back. Her breath rose in slow, steady clouds. No cubs flanked her this time. They must be old enough now to range farther, to test their strength against the mountain. Snowbell approached with the same measured calm she'd shown in the hospital, leaving a trail of deep prints in the snow. She stopped an arm's length away. Evelyn's hands were shaking as she pulled off one glove. "You have terrible timing," she murmured, voice breaking into a smile. "You know that? You always show up when my shift's over." Snowbell's mouth opened. Something small and pale dropped from her jaws into the snow at Evelyn's boots. Evelyn looked down. Nestled there like a tiny piece of moon was a tooth. Small, curved, white as the drifts around them. A milk tooth, roots clean and fresh. One of the cubs' first. For a moment, she couldn't move. The meaning of it washed over her in a slow, overwhelming wave. "You saved my children. You are part of this story now. This is yours to keep." Her throat tightened painfully. She crouched, fingers clumsy, as she picked up the little tooth and turned it in her palm. It felt absurdly heavy for something so delicate. When she stood again, Snowbell was closer. The bear pressed her head lightly against Evelyn's shoulder. The rumble that rose from her chest this time was soft and deep, like distant thunder echoing through a valley. It vibrated through Evelyn's bones, through the tooth in her hand, through every moment that had led from a bloody paw print on a hospital floor to this quiet, impossible meeting in the snow. "Thank you," Evelyn whispered, though she wasn't sure who she was thanking anymore. "For trusting me, for not eating me, for all of it." After a few heartbeats, Snowbell stepped back. She looked at Evelyn one last time, a gaze that seemed to hold the whole winter forest in it, then turned and walked back into the darkness among the trees. The night swallowed her without a sound. Evelyn stood in the circle of light, fingers curled around the tiny tooth until her knuckles ached. Around her, the hospital hummed gently, old pipes, fluorescent lights, computers pinging their small human concerns. In her chest, something wild hummed back. Out there, beyond the halo of human effort, a family of white bears moved through the snow, alive because, on a night much like this one, a nurse had chosen to see a plea instead of a threat. And whenever the wind came down from the mountain just right, pushing at the hospital doors with cold fingers, Evelyn would look up from her charts, smile to herself, and imagine a white shape at the edge of the trees, keeping watch. She never quite believed the stories the janitor told about seeing pale fur at the forest line, but she never quite stopped listening for the sound of a bear's rumbling thank you either. This story reminds us that trust is the most fragile and powerful bridge between two worlds. A wounded wild creature, built by nature to fear humans, chose to believe in one person at the moment she needed help most. And Evelyn, despite her fear, chose compassion over instinct, courage over safety, and mercy over protocol. It teaches us that kindness can cross any boundary, even the ancient line between human and wild. Courage isn't the absence of fear, but the decision to act with love, despite trembling hands. Every life, no matter how different or untamed, deserves a chance to heal. Real miracles happen when trust is answered with compassion, and compassion is returned with loyalty. In saving the mother bear, Evelyn didn't just protect one life. She saved a family, restored a piece of the wilderness, and proved that the smallest act of bravery can echo across mountains. It is a story of healing, of second chances, and of the quiet, unspoken bond that can form between hearts that were never meant to meet, but did and changed each other forever.